Her name is Yelena Belova, and even though she's only been around for 25 years, one of the most complicated character backstories in Marvel Comics, so much so that it's unclear whether there might just be a second one of her running around. Hi, I'm Nando, and in this series I break down a Marvel Comics character, looking at their history, their powers, their friends, their personality, and give you some reading recommendations. And I do this all with characters that are being introduced into the collectible card game Marvel Snap. So if you play Marvel Snap and you're like, hey, who's Yelena? What is her deal? This video is perfect for you. But also if you're someone who doesn't play Marvel Snap and just want to learn about Yelena, that's like the first 80% of the video, so you hang tight. And it is important because, like I said, Yelena's backstory is quite complicated. And I'm not going to get into all the details. I do think there's stuff that you could pretty much throw out at this point because either it doesn't matter or, like, canonically it may not have happened. I don't know if there has been a definitive Yelena story that's mapped out exactly where she was when and how it all fits together. Because let's start here. Yelena Belova, the White Widow, as she's sometimes called, although not until recently, is a member of the Red Room program. She is a widow. She's, I believe, the first Black Widow candidate after Natasha to, like, graduate to the level that she's at. So, like, she's very, very good. And you go through this program. It's a Russian government program creating super soldier spies. So, like, when you're part of the Red Room, it's not just like you're a spy. They mind control you, they clone you sometimes. Sometimes you're a robot and you didn't even know about it. It gets complicated. Because of that, there are certain things that Yelena has done that just don't gel with what she's currently up to. And the explanation I have heard, I think I first saw this on the video by Mary Marvelite about Yelena, is that one of the Yelenas out doing Yelena stuff is a clone or, you know, some sort of decoy version of her. I think that's fair. And I think because of that, you can separate the Yelena stories into two groups: real Yelena and clone Yelena. And just from my perspective, real Yelena ones, interesting. Clone Yelena ones, kind of dumb. So for instance, real Yelena, she first shows up, well, I guess she was first in like a sketchbook or something. Her first actual appearance in a comic was in Inhumans Volume 2, Issue 5. By Paul Jenkins with art by Jay Lee, Avalon Studios, Richard Starkings, and Wes Abbott. So in this book, Yelena is just a spy. She shows up, gives somebody a weapon, and is like, I'm Black Widow. Obviously, she's blonde, so that's the first thing you're going to notice about Yelena, different hair color. And she wears a slightly different outfit. Black Widow's, like, suit is usually that full leather kind of body. Sometimes there's certain accents and red stuff, and sometimes they kind of design it with lines going up and down, but either way, usually covers her whole body. Yelena sometimes, not always, but especially in the beginning, had an exposed midriff. That was one of the things that you're like, oh, okay, that's the difference in costumes. But Yelena's first real story is in the Marvel Knights Black Widow comic by Devin Grayson with art by J.G. Jones, Dave Camp, Richard Starkings, and Comicraft. And in this book, we get a very succinct introduction to Yelena. It's pretty much all about Yelena interacting with Natasha and kind of set herself apart from Natasha. This is why I'm the new hotness. You're old and busted. I'm better than you. This is why I'm different. And right off the bat, like, part of it is they're not that different, right? They have similar skill sets. Obviously, they were trained by the same people. Their attitudes are a little different, but, like, they're pretty much the same. Natasha has more experience, obviously. She's been at this for longer. Yelena is younger, so, like, hypothetically, that would make her potentially stronger than Natasha. But at this point, I wouldn't even say they compare, because Yelena shows up, she's like, I'm Black Widow now, I'm the best, you're not the best, see, I'm beating you and I'm proving that I'm the best one. And Natasha at this point in the story is trying to protect everybody from this bioweapon, so she's like, yeah, cool kid, it's fine, you do your thing, whatever. So Yelena, right off the bat, she's too eager, she's trying to prove herself, and it is because she's been living in Natasha's shadow, even as someone who never knew Natasha, but, like, was part of the Red Room. But so I was like, oh, you're almost as good as Natasha. So then when she gets out and she's like, I'm as good as Natasha, she wants to prove that by showing Natasha. So she's very eager to prove herself, and Natasha is able to exploit that. In the end of this story, it turns out, even though Yelena thought she killed Natasha, that was actually part of Natasha's plan, which involved tricking Yelena. And Yelena isn't like a bad guy in this story, but she's an antagonist working against Natasha. So, like, the fact that Natasha is not only able to, you know, deactivate the bioweapon, but she's able to do it by tricking Yelena into helping her, it's like, you're still not as good as Natasha, Yelena. You got some work to do. So some other important Yelena stories. There's this wild story that, like, I've read and I still don't completely understand, where Black Widow, Natasha, basically just face-offs Yelena. She, like, captures her, I guess, drugs her, and switches phases with her. And you're like, well, why was she doing that? She's trying to infiltrate something? Like, kind of. She is trying to, like, get at the people that are Yelena's handlers. But at the same time, she's trying to teach Yelena a lesson. Like, hey, kid, don't be a spy. And it's like, there are other ways to teach this lesson, miss. Like, I don't think we needed to fully face off me. And, you know, trick me into thinking that I was a different person. Because then just face off where it's like, oh, you're actually in my face. It's like she wakes up in Natasha's house having seemingly just slept with Daredevil. And for this whole series, Natasha's trying to trick Yelena into thinking that she's Natasha. It's really weird. And at the end of the story, Yelena quits, goes to Cuba. Now, this is where she kind of changes gears and where we do see one of the most important things about Yelena, which is, as well as being a good spy, she's also kind of a manager and maybe even like a businessman. I don't want to say she's like hustle grind set version of Black Widow, but she does end up in this position a lot. So she goes to Cuba, becomes a model, and then creates a modeling agency staffed by former sex workers. So just like an altruistic endeavor, but she is also, you know, making lots of money and living the good life. She runs into Natasha, who's in the middle of a mission, and she like helps Natasha. She's like, hey, you, I remember you from that other time. Hey, you need some help? And, you know, she's not a bad guy at this point. She's cool. So those are all Yelena's stories. It's mostly her hanging out with Black Widow and either being difficult with Black Widow, helping Black Widow, stuff like that. Let's talk about the character that might be clone Yelena. So she starts working with S.H.I.E.L.D. and she gets burnt by Sauron, the dinosaur man from X-Men stuff. And then she joins Hydra. So she joins up with Hydra, so they're like, we'll fix you, we'll get you back to normal, and we're gonna give you superpowers. And they basically turn Yelena into the Super Adaptoid, which is Marvel's version of a Mazo, this robot that can copy powers. It's very hard to kill. Why Yelena is working with Hydra at this point just doesn't track, because she has like a very flexible moral code, and she'll kill people, you know, she'll do all the spy stuff, but like joining Hydra just does feel like a lot. And like trying to kill the Avengers and getting revenge for this does seem like maybe overkill. And it's weird because the Super Adaptoid version of Yelena dies, but we'll learn AIM just has another version of her, so another clone, I guess, of Super Adaptoid Yelena. And at this point, you're like, well, wait, how many Yelenas just exist? Are they just getting new Yelenas from the Red Room? Do they have a bunch of them running around? I think the answer is like maybe. The only thing I would say that like directly contradicts that is just that no one's ever talked about it. And Yelena, when she finds out about this, isn't like, hey, by the way, I'm pretty mad about what you do with my clone. Like, you figure after this, there would be some story where Yelena gets revenge on Hydra or AIM and, you know, explains all this and really sets out her moral code. And maybe they'll do that in the future, but for now, we're not there. But yeah, for a while, she's like on the board of AIM. She's doing pure bad guy stuff. She's also hanging out with Blade, and that's cool. And that's kind of where you're like, oh, that's good Yelena again. That's just regular Yelena. Now, a Yelena did join the Thunderbolts. So this is during the Dark Reign event when Norman Osborn had taken control of everything. It's a pretty wild story how he actually manages to pull this off, trick people into thinking he's not the Green Goblin. But one of the things he does when he gets power is he creates a new Thunderbolts. And this, and I know I've described like the General Ross Thunderbolts as Marvel Suicide Squad. They're not really Marvel Suicide Squad. And people brought that up. I'm like, yeah, you're right. They kind of skew a little closer to Suicide Squad than the original Thunderbolts, in that they are like a group of kind of anti-hero supervillainy types like Deadpool and Agent Venom and stuff, but in reality, like, there's a lot of difference between them. I think this version of the Thunderbolts, the Yelena Thunderbolts, is probably the closest this team has ever been to being Marvel's Suicide Squad. I'm trying to remember who's on this team. It's Yelena, it's Paladin, Black Ant, then you got Ghost, and you got a character named Headsman who I totally forgot about. So honestly, this Thunderbolts pretty close to what we're getting in the movies. You've got Ghost, you've got Yelena, that's it. I guess you got Paladin, who's like another super soldier. I guess this team is also like the least powerful version of the Thunderbolts, which feels like what we're getting in the movies as well. Obviously, the version of the Thunderbolts in the comics right now is pretty much the movie Thunderbolts, but like out of all the versions of the team that have existed, this feels closest to what we're getting in this movie. Now, this team is led by Yelena, but spoilers for this story, which like I did kind of enjoy. I think there's some fun stuff in Dark Reign. That's not Yelena, it's Natasha posing as Yelena so that she could spy on Norman Osborn. Now, Norman Osborn secretly set this whole thing up so he could spy on her, and it's a whole big thing, but basically Yelena is not involved at all. It seems to be her, but it wasn't. And Norman Osborn does have one of the Yelenas in stasis at this point, so like, he also has the Yelena, although I think that's eventually the one that's going to be in charge of AIM. Eventually, all this is wiped out, the Red Room is destroyed by Natasha, Yelena is more or less set free, and then she gets to do her own thing, shows up in some Black Widow books, hangs out with Hawkeye, hangs out with Winter Soldier, and then there's this new White Widow comic, which we're maybe 2 issues into on the Marvel Unlimited app, probably a little bit further, where she is a person just living in the suburbs, trying to have a life, and also manage a team of Black Widows. But it's more about her kind of finding herself, because she's like, I never had a regular life. What do I even like? And she, at the same time uncovers a big corporate conspiracy, but it's fun. I would say it's kind of going for the same thing that like Matt Fraction, David Aja, Hawkeye is going for, although definitely not with the same like art, but that same kind of superhero slice of life thing. Honestly, it feels like a little bit of the Saldan Ahmed like Miss Marvel. I don't know. It's fun. I don't mind it. I think it characterizes her very similarly to how she's characterized in Black Widow and then in Hawkeye and Thunderbolts, which makes her this like young version of Natasha. She thinks she knows best, she's got a lot of energy, but she also like thinks she's doing everything differently than Natasha, right? Like the way Natasha is this classic spy who like flicks her hair right in the movie. Yelena thinks that's silly, she doesn't do that. I think they have a relationship in the movies where they really do feel like sisters. I don't think that's quite what it is in the comics, but it's similar. Power wise, I would say she's about as good as Black Widow. They're not very different. Yelena, if I'm not positive about this. This is just like a sense that I get. Natasha tends to do a lot of like fighting. She's a big fighter and she uses guns for sure, but she's very like, stealthy, jumps into a place, does a bunch of kicks, whatever. I feel like for whatever reason, my like vision of Yelena involves a gun. She's very gun heavy and like big rifles. She sniping and stuff like that. I don't know if that's like something that was a conscious decision or is just what she's been up to, but I do feel like you tend to see her with more of that going on. Also, her costume used to be obviously the Black Widowish costume, but now she's a white costume and she's the White Widow. As far as rating recommendations, I would definitely say this new series is good. It's written by Sarah Galley, with art by Alessandro Miracolo, Matt Milla, and Travis Lanham. Again, very slice of lifey. It's kind of silly. She reads a lot like the Yelena that we know from Hawkeye and Black Widow. And she's also, like, she's kind of silly. She's a little bit of like, I know you think I am normal girl who isn't spy, but it turns out I am spy. And it's like, yeah, we all know. Everybody around you knows something's up with you, but you think you're a little bit better at hiding it. I don't know. There's characters that this feels like, I don't know exactly who it is, but there's another character in media who I'm like, yeah, she's kind of like this. I don't know. Honestly, she kind of feels like a character that would be in Venture Brothers, who would just be like, doing spy stuff all the time, really poorly, and everybody would be like, yeah, no, she's a spy, right? We all know she's a spy, but she's not good at hiding it, and she doesn't care, and she thinks she's really cool, and she is. I really do like Yelena. I think she's a good character in these comics. I think it is crazy that this character within 20 years was a Nazi, but there were 2 Yelenas, let's say. And I think that Marvel Knight story that was Yelena's first big comic story, very good introduction to that character. Fun, 3 issues. Like, a lot of these comics that I've talked about are pretty short, which is nice. I would say that one, and then I would say the other one I enjoy is that Cuba story. It's called Black Widow, The Things They Say About Her. It's from 2005 by Richard K. Morgan, with art by Sean Phillips, Bill Sienkiewicz, Dan Brown, and Corey Petit. A lot of good Widow, a lot of good Yelena, and some good Daredevil, which is fun. And yeah, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Florence Pugh is playing Yelena. Apparently she loves it. She's one of those fan favorite characters that I think people want to pop into everything. And I think her appearance at Hawkeye was like perfect, because it was exactly silly enough to be entertaining without drawing too much focus. I think she plays really well with Haley Steinfeld. I'm curious to see, because it seems like she might be the leader of this new Thunderbolts asterisk, whatever that means. So that's interesting. And I do think Florence Pugh just really likes making these movies, which is good, because if you want a character like this to keep popping up and stuff, you want an actor who like enjoys it. Besides that, I don't think she's ever been in anything else. Like, she's been in cartoons and pops up in video games, but this character is relatively new. Like, all those comics I was talking about were from like 2000 and maybe like 1999, but like there haven't been a lot of opportunities for Yelena stuff. And also, outside of like Iron Man and Avengers stuff, Black Widow was not always this humongous character. Like, you wouldn't see her getting like a bad movie or TV series in the 90s like Captain America and some of these other guys. So if like they made one of those after 2000, I bet Yelena would have showed up, but they didn't exist, so who cares? In Marvel Snap, White Widow is a 2-cost, 2-power. With the on-reveal effect, add a Widow's Kiss to your opponent's side of this location. Now, Widow's Kiss, what's that? It is a 0 cost, 0 power card with the ongoing ability. This has -4 power, disable if your side of this location is full. So when you play Yelena, White Widow, the Widow's Kiss shows up on your opponent's side of the field, then it has -4 cost. Your opponent needs to fill up that location, and that way it still is 0, so like it's not good to have it there unless your opponent also wants to fill up all the locations, but like usually that is taking a space off the board that your opponent would be able to use. But if they can at least fill up the space, it doesn't count negatively against them. Like it's not negative points. It's functions similarly to Widow's Bite, where Natasha puts a Widow's Bite card into your hand and you can't draw a card until you play it. I do think that this is a pretty good like representation of Yelena, especially in relation to Natasha, because I would say, I don't know if this is true, I'm sure people have figured this out, Natasha's version of it does feel more effective, right? Like I think the Widow's Bite slows you down so much. It gets played anyway, and it is a -1 power. And especially these days, boards get filled up so much that it's like, I wouldn't be super worried about ending my turn with a -4 Widow's Bite. Honestly, the situation where I'd be the most worried about that is just if it happens in the last turn of the game. You know, like my opponent throws a Widow's Bite and it's like, oh, I would have filled this location up, but I didn't. So I think that the Widow's Bite, oh man, I'm gonna say Bite and Kiss. You guys know what I mean. Bite is the one that goes into your hand, Kiss is the one that goes on the field, Bite is Black Widow, Kiss is Yelena. But I think the Black Widow version of it is the worst one for your opponent to get, right? Like that is the one that I think has the most negative effects. But Yelena could be worse. Like it could be -4 for your opponent. That's a lot, but it's a little bit more straightforward. And if your opponent plays it smart, it will be a 0 cost card. So like, I do think the same way that Natasha is more skilled, she's been at this longer. Yelena, she's got a lot of energy. She's really eager to prove herself, making this bigger move, but in reality, it's not as good as the Widow's Bite. So like, I don't know. I think that part of it's kind of cool. I like that they just both have similar powers. I wish more people had that. I think, you know, Beta Ray Bill and Thor are another good version of this, where like it's the same power just tweaked a little bit, so it's a difference in style. And that's really where Yelena and Natasha are. Like sure, they think they're very different from each other, but compared to everybody else in the Marvel universe, they might as well be the same person. I guess she combos really well with Natasha. Like I think the junk decks are going to be tough the week she comes out. I think I'm definitely going to get her. Combos decently with like Mojo and another card where filling up your opponent's side of the board is valuable. And kind of combos well with Daredevil. If you know where your opponent's playing their card, then you can put the Widow's Kiss on their side of the board, and it's like, well, now they have to deal with that next turn. That's like turn 6, so it's like they might be out of options. So that's cool. I overall think this is a good card. I think this season has been full of pretty good cards. I have no opinion on John Walker. I haven't played him. I don't know anybody that loves him. I think Red Guardian's been great. I think Red Hulk has been maybe too good in a way that's not super fun, but whatever. And I think Zemo is just a pretty interesting card. So if you enjoyed this video, like it, share it with people who play Marvel Snap and on those, you know, message boards and subreddits and all that stuff. My name is Nando. I have a podcast called Mostly Nitpicking. I have another channel called Nando V Movies, and you can find these videos on YouTube and on Nebula. Goodbye.